I'm Lee 35, a tech entrepreneur who grew up in the shadow of my perfect sister. Mom always made it clear where her pride lay, while Jessica basked in the glory. Dad just worked and stayed silent. That Thanksgiving dinner was the culmination of decades of comparison, judgment, and hidden truths. None of them expected what happened when Mom made her usual cutting remark, and Jessica smirked thinking her secret was safe. Before I dive into what happened at that fateful dinner, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss how I finally stood up for myself after years of being the family. Disappointment. Growing up in suburban Boston in the late 80s and early 90s shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. Our house on Maple Street looked perfect from the outside. White picket fence, neatly trimmed lawn, 4 bedrooms for a family of 4. But inside those walls, a hierarchy was firmly established before I could even form complete sentences. Jessica, my sister, 2 years. My senior was the golden child from day one. I have memories, or perhaps they're stories, told so often they became memories of Mom carrying Jessica around like a trophy. Look at those beautiful blue eyes she'd tell strangers at the grocery store. And she's already saying complete sentences at only 20 months. Jessica would perform on cue, solidifying her position at the top of the family pyramid. I came along 2 years later, a colicky baby who cried too much and didn't sleep through the night until I was almost 1. Mom often reminded me of this, as if my infant sleep patterns were a personal failure. Jessica slept through the night at 6 weeks, she'd say with a sigh that conveyed just how disappointing I was by comparison. By kindergarten, the pattern was set. Jessica brought home perfect papers with gold stars and smiley faces. She read at a 3rd grade level by 1st grade. She won the spelling bee, the science fair, and was chosen as line leader more than any other kid in her class. Each achievement was celebrated with ice cream outings and proud phone calls to relatives. I wasn't a bad student. I was actually pretty good. B's with occasional prot. As teachers who liked me, friends who enjoyed my company. But in our house, good wasn't good enough. Good was failure, when compared to excellent. Why can't you be more like your sister became the soundtrack of my childhood. If Jessica got an A+, my A- was a disappointment. If she won 1st place, my 3rd place might as well have been last. Dad was physically present, but emotionally absent. He left for work before dawn and returned after dinner most days. Weekends found him catching up on paperwork or sleeping off exhaustion. The rare times he engaged with us kids, he seemed more comfortable with Jessica's achievements than my creative endeavors. "That's great, buddy," he'd say absently when I showed him my latest project, his eyes already drifting back to his newspaper. One particular memory stands out from when I was 8 years old. I had set up a lemonade stand at the end of our driveway, not just selling drinks, but offering computer help to neighbors. Even then I had a knack for technology that seemed to come naturally. I made $78 that weekend and was bursting with pride when I showed Mom my earnings. "That's nice, Lee," she said with a distracted pat on my head. "But Jessica just found out she's been selected for the regional math team. She's the youngest one they've ever chosen." And just like that, my accomplishment disappeared into the shadow of Jessica's greater glory. Jessica wasn't cruel about her position as the favored child, at least not at first. But children absorb the hierarchies around them, and she gradually began to embody the superiority our mother bestowed upon her. "It's okay that you don't understand, Lee," she'd say when I struggled with homework. "Not everyone can be good at everything." Her condescension wrapped in the guise of sisterly support. I developed coping mechanisms. Humor became my shield. I learned to laugh at myself before others could laugh at me. I built self-reliance knowing praise would be scarce. Most importantly, I cultivated an inner sense of confidence that didn't require external validation. While Jessica needed the gold stars and the applause, I learned to measure my worth by standards that made sense to me. By the time I reached middle school, Jessica and I existed in parallel universes that occasionally intersected at the dinner table. She had her advanced classes, her athletic achievements, her popular friends. I had my computer club, my small circle of loyal friends, and my growing interest in the emerging internet businesses of the mid-90s. "Lee's always on that computer," Mom would complain to visitors. "Jessica's out winning tennis tournaments and volunteering at the animal shelter, and he's just wasting time online." What she couldn't see was that I wasn't wasting time. I was learning, exploring, and building the foundation for my future. But that wasn't the kind of success that registered on her narrow measuring stick. The distance between Jessica and me grew as we aged. She embraced her position as the family star, while I retreated into my own world, where I could define success on my own terms. The family narrative was firmly established. Jessica was going places, and I was just along for the ride. But narratives can change sometimes in ways no one expects. High school only amplified the differences between Jessica and me. She entered as a freshman, with a reputation that preceded her, the younger sister, of the brilliant Jessica Thomas, who had set records in both academics and athletics. Teachers expected greatness from her before she even set foot in a classroom, and she delivered. Jessica became valedictorian captain of both the tennis and debate teams, president of the student council, and prom queen. College recruiters started contacting her during her sophomore year. By senior year, our living room mantel was crowded with her trophies, medals, and certificates of achievement. My high school experience was different. I wasn't unpopular, but I wasn't the social butterfly Jessica was. I maintained solid B-plus grades, with minimal effort, which only reinforced Mom's belief that I was lazy and underachieving. If you just applied yourself like Jessica, she'd lecture during our increasingly tense dinners. What she never understood was that I was applying myself, just not, to the things she valued. While Jessica was building the perfect college application, I was building websites. I started by designing simple pages for local businesses, from the flower shop down the street, Dad's friend's insurance company, the diner where my friends and I hung out on weekends. I charged $50 per site at first, then $100, then $500, as my skills improved and word spread about the tech-savvy teenager who could create an online presence for small businesses. The real turning point came during Jessica's senior year, when she received her acceptance letter from Harvard. The celebration lasted for days. Mom invited the extended family over for a special dinner. She called the local newspaper, which ran a small piece about the local teen phenom headed to the Ivy League. Dad actually took a full day off work to celebrate something he hadn't done for anyone's birthday in years. 6 months later, when my acceptance letter from the state university arrived, Mom barely glanced at it. "At least they took you," she said with a shrug. "Maybe you can bring your grades up enough to transfer somewhere better next year." Jessica left for Harvard that fall with a car full of new belongings and a heart full of confidence. I started at the state university with a used laptop and a growing resentment. The pattern continued even with Jessica 3 hours away. Sunday phone calls consisted of 20 minutes of Jessica's latest achievements and 2 minutes of cursory questions about my life. 2 years into college, I made a decision that nearly fractured our family. The internet boom was hitting its stride, and I had an idea for a web application that could streamline communication between small businesses and their customers. It was 2006, just as social media was beginning to emerge, and I saw an opportunity that wouldn't wait. I dropped out of college after my sophomore year. The day I told my parents remains one of the most painful memories of my life. "You're throwing your life away." Mom said, her voice simultaneously angry and resigned, as if she'd always expected this failure. "Jessica's on the dean's list at Harvard, and you're quitting a perfectly good state school to do what, play around on computers." Dad, in a rare moment of engagement, looked genuinely concerned. "Son, without a degree, what kind of future are you looking at? How will you support yourself?" What I couldn't make them understand was that the traditional path they valued so highly wasn't the only route to success. The digital world was changing everything, creating opportunities that hadn't existed when they were my age. But their worldview had no room for the kind of future I envisioned. Jessica, home for spring break during this confrontation, offered her 2 cents. "Lee's always marched to his own drummer," she said, with that mixture of condescension and false support that had become her trademark. "Maybe this will be good for him. Not everyone is cut out for higher education." The next few years were difficult. I moved into a tiny apartment with 2 roommates to save money while building my business. I took freelance web design jobs to pay the bills while developing my application at night. There were weeks when I survived on ramen noodles and coffee times when my electricity was shut off because I couldn't pay the bill. Meanwhile, Jessica graduated from Harvard with honors and immediately landed a position at a prestigious financial firm in Boston. Her starting salary was more than my parents had ever made combined. She bought a luxury condo in the city, drove a new BMW, and took European vacations that she documented extensively on social media. Family gatherings became exercises in humiliation. Jessica just got another promotion, Mom would announce to anyone within earshot. She's the youngest senior analyst in the company's history. Then inevitably she'd turn to me, Lee's still doing his computer thing. Maybe someday it'll turn into a real job. I stopped attending family events when possible. I limited phone calls and visits. I focused on my business, which was struggling but showing promise. What none of them knew was that each failure taught me something valuable. Each setback contained the seeds of future success. While they saw a dropout going nowhere, I was building a foundation brick by brick. The irony was that Jessica's prestigious career actually helped inspire my first truly successful business idea. During one of our rare phone conversations, she complained about the inefficiency of her firm's client management system. We're using 3 different platforms that don't talk to each other. I waste hours every week just transferring information from one system to another. That night, I couldn't sleep. By morning, I had the outline for IntegrateX, a platform that would allow businesses to seamlessly connect different management systems. It was the right idea at the right time, and though my family didn't know it yet, it would change everything. 7 years after dropping out of college, my life looked very different than anyone in my family imagined. IntegrateX had survived its rocky start and was now generating consistent revenue. What began as a solution for small businesses had caught the attention of mid-sized companies facing the same integration challenges. We weren't a household name, but in certain business circles, our reputation for solving complex system integration problems was growing. I had moved from my cramped apartment to a comfortable condo, traded my beaten-up Toyota for a reliable newer model Audi, and hired a team of 12 developers who shared my vision. I wasn't wealthy by Silicon Valley standards, but I was doing well, very well. None of my family knew this. When we spoke, which wasn't often, I kept details vague. Business is steady, I'd say, when Mom asked her perfunctory questions about my life. The company's growing. They never pressed for details, assuming there was little success to report. Jessica, meanwhile, continued her meteoric rise through the financial world. She became the youngest vice president in her firm's history, a fact Mom mentioned to me at least once during every conversation. Her social media showcased business trips to London, Tokyo, and Singapore. Her wardrobe consisted exclusively of designer labels. Her vacations were at 5-star resorts, and she'd upgraded from her luxury condo to a penthouse apartment with views of Boston Harbor. What wasn't visible in her carefully curated online presence or mentioned in Mom's glowing reports was the financial reality behind Jessica's lifestyle. The truth emerged during a rare in-person meeting when Jessica asked to meet for coffee during a business trip that brought me to Boston. She looked perfect, as always. Expertly highlighted hair-tailored suit, manicured nails. But there was something tight around her eyes, a tension in her smile that hadn't been there before. After 20 minutes of small talk, she got to the point. I need a loan, Lee. I nearly choked on my coffee. You need what? A loan. Temporary, of course. Things are a bit tight right now. How tight is tight? I asked, genuinely curious about what financial distress looked like to someone like Jessica. She shifted uncomfortably before answering. I'm carrying about $70,000 in credit card debt. The minimum payments are killing me, and I've got the property tax due on the penthouse next month. I sat back trying to process this information. But you're a VP at Bradford Financial. Your salary must be substantial. It is, she admitted. But there are expectations. I need to dress a certain way, live in the right neighborhood, be seen at the right restaurants and events. It adds up faster than you'd think. The picture became clearer. Jessica's perfect life was a carefully constructed facade, built on debt and sustained by appearances. Her success, which had been held over my head for decades, was in many ways as illusory as my perceived failure. How much do you need? I asked finally. $20,000 would help me consolidate some of the high-interest cards. I can pay you back in installments once I get my year-end bonus. I agreed to help transferring the money to her account the next day. I asked only one thing in return. Don't tell Mom and Dad about this. I'd prefer to keep our financial arrangements private. She readily agreed, seemingly relieved that I wasn't going to use this moment of vulnerability against her. What she didn't realize was that I had no desire to expose her struggles. Years of being the family disappointment had taught me that publicly undermining others brought no real satisfaction. That first loan wasn't the last. Over the next 2 years, as Integrate X grew into a significant player in our industry, Jessica's financial situation deteriorated further. The demands of maintaining her image of success increased as she rose through the ranks. Each promotion came with greater expectations for her lifestyle and social obligations. 6 months after the first loan, she called again. "Lee, I hate to ask, but I'm in a bind again." This time it was $30,000 for outstanding tax payments she'd deferred. 3 months later, another call, $40,000 to prevent her car from being repossessed and to catch up on her mortgage. By this point, Integrate X had attracted attention from investors. We'd closed a funding round that valued the company at $20 million. I had wealth now, real wealth, that exceeded Jessica's income several times over. But I still drove my modest car, lived in my comfortable but unassuming condo, and kept a low profile. After Jessica's fourth request for financial help, I suggested a more formal arrangement. "This isn't sustainable," I told her, during a private dinner at her favorite Boston restaurant. "You're drowning in debt while trying to maintain appearances." "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, a rare note of desperation in her voice. "I can't downsize now. Everyone would know something was wrong. My reputation would be ruined." "I have a proposition," I said. "I'll establish a fund to cover your existing debts and provide a monthly stipend to supplement your income. In exchange, you'll take a 5% equity stake in Integrate X." "Your computer business?" she asked, the old condescension briefly flashing across her face before reality reasserted itself. "My technology company," I corrected gently, "which is currently valued at $20 million. 5% would make you a minority shareholder worth $1 million on paper, with potential for significant growth." Her eyes widened as the implications sank in. "You're serious? Your company is worth that much?" I nodded. "The agreement would include a confidentiality clause. No one needs to know about our arrangement. Not Mom and Dad, not your colleagues, no one." Jessica agreed, though not without reluctance. Having to acknowledge that her younger brother, the family disappointment, was in a position to rescue her was clearly difficult. But financial desperation trumped pride, and we formalized the agreement the following week. For nearly 3 years, this arrangement continued in secret. Jessica maintained her image as the successful executive while quietly depending on my monthly transfers to sustain her lifestyle. I continued to play the role of underachieving brother during the rare family gatherings I attended, deflecting Mom's comparisons and judgments with practiced indifference. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years I'd been told I would never measure up to Jessica's success. Now I was funding that very success, while receiving no recognition for my own achievements. Part of me was content with this arrangement. I'd never sought my parents' approval with the desperation Jessica had. But another part, a part I wasn't entirely proud of, was growing tired of the charade. As Integrate X approached its 7th year, everything changed. We were acquired by a larger tech company for a sum that transformed me from comfortable to wealthy overnight. The terms of the acquisition allowed me to maintain control of day-to-day operations while accessing the resources of our parent company. My net worth, on paper, exceeded $50 million, though I still lived relatively modestly compared to what I could afford. Jessica's financial situation, despite my assistance, continued to deteriorate. What began as extravagance had evolved into something more concerning. She took increasingly risky financial positions invested in questionable schemes, promising quick returns, and expanded her spending to include luxury items that seemed designed more to impress others than bring her joy. During one of our quarterly financial review meetings, I expressed my concerns. The monthly amount we agreed upon has increased 3 times in 2 years. I pointed out, reviewing the figures on my laptop. "At this rate, your expenses will exceed even the generous terms we established." Jessica flushed with irritation. "You don't understand the pressures I'm under. I've been nominated for the executive committee. Do you have any idea what that means? I'm in line to become the youngest female COO in the company's history?" And that requires a second vacation home in the Hamptons, I asked, referencing her latest request for additional funds. Image matters in my world, she snapped. The committee members all have summer homes. They vacation together, make connections on the golf course and at beach parties. This isn't frivolous spending. It's strategic investment in my career. I took a moment before responding, studying my sister's face. Behind the defensive anger, I saw something else. Fear. Jessica was terrified of losing her status, of being exposed as less successful than she appeared. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being exceptional, in meeting and exceeding the expectations our mother had set for her decades ago. I'll increase the monthly amount, I said finally. But we need to establish some boundaries. Your equity in Integrate X is now worth over $3 million. You could cash out a portion and resolve these issues permanently. And how would I explain suddenly having that kind of money, she demanded. Besides, if your company continues growing, that equity could be worth much more in the future. She was right about the potential growth, but her resistance to using her own assets revealed something troubling. Jessica wasn't just addicted to the lifestyle. She was addicted to the narrative of success on her own terms. Acknowledging my financial support in any public way would shatter the image she'd cultivated so carefully. Our arrangement continued, but with new tensions. Jessica's requests became demands. Her gratitude, never effusive, disappeared entirely. She began treating our financial meetings as annoying obligations rather than the lifeline they actually were. The most troubling development was her behavior at family gatherings. Rather than showing me even a modicum of respect given our private arrangement, she doubled down on the established dynamic. She would smile smugly when Mom compared our lives, adding her own subtle digs about my modest lifestyle compared to her luxury penthouse and vacation properties. During one holiday dinner, after Jessica described her recent first-class trip to Paris, Mom turned to me with her familiar look of disappointment. Why don't you ever travel anywhere interesting, Lee? Your sister has been to 3 continents this year alone. Before I could respond with my usual deflection, Jessica added, Lee's just not ambitious in that way, Mom. Some people are content with less. She gestured vaguely at my casual clothing, a stark contrast to her designer outfit. I said nothing in that moment, but later, when we were alone, I confronted her. That was unnecessary. What, she asked, with feigned innocence. You know exactly what. Reinforcing Mom's perception that I'm some kind of failure when you're fully aware of my actual circumstances. Jessica shrugged. It's just easier to maintain the status quo with them. Besides, you've never cared what they think. Why start now? But I did care more than I wanted to admit. Not about gaining their approval, that ship had sailed long ago, but about the fundamental dishonesty that had come to define our family relationships. Every interaction was built on false premises and hidden truths. As another Thanksgiving approached, I found myself dreading the familiar pattern. Jessica would arrive with expensive gifts and stories of professional triumphs. Mom would beam with pride and make pointed comparisons. Dad would sit quietly, occasionally nodding his approval of Jessica's achievements, and I would sit through it all, maintaining the charade that had gone on far too long. The night before Thanksgiving, Jessica called with yet another financial emergency, this time involving an investment opportunity that couldn't wait. The amount she requested was substantial even by our inflated standards. This isn't covered in our agreement, I said firmly. We just adjusted your monthly stipend last quarter. This is different, she insisted. It's a time-sensitive investment opportunity through one of the executive committee members. If I don't buy in, it will look suspicious. Have you done your due diligence on this investment? I asked. There's no time for that, she said impatiently. Marcus is only offering this to his inner circle. The fact that he included me is a huge vote of confidence. Every instinct I had developed as a businessman told me this was problematic. Jessica, this sounds like it could be problematic legally. Private investment opportunities offered only to inner circles raise red flags. Are you going to help me or not? She demanded, ignoring my concerns. For the first time since our arrangement began, I refused. Not with this. I'm happy to review the investment details with you, but I won't transfer funds for something that sounds potentially unethical or illegal. Her response was cold. Fine. I'll remember this the next time you need something from me. The implied threat was clear, though what she thought I needed from her wasn't. Our relationship had become transactional, in the worst way possible. As I hung up the phone, I made a decision that had been forming in my mind for months. The charade had gone on long enough. This Thanksgiving would be different. Thanksgiving Day arrived with the crisp chill of late November in New England. Mom's house looked the same as it always had. Traditional decorations placed in exactly the same spots year after year. The familiar scent of roasting turkey and pumpkin pie filled the air. As I parked my car in the driveway, deliberately arriving exactly on time rather than early or late. Jessica's BMW was already there, parked prominently where it couldn't be missed. I took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell, mentally preparing for what would likely be a pivotal family gathering. Mom answered, her critical eye immediately taking inventory of my appearance. "You could have worn a tie," she said, instead of hello. "Jessica's boyfriend is wearing one." This was news. Jessica brought someone. Marcus Whitfield, Mom said, with poorly concealed excitement. "He's on the executive committee at her firm. Very impressive man. They've been dating for 2 months." The name triggered an immediate connection. Marcus was the source of the questionable investment opportunity Jessica had approached me about. The pieces fell into place with disturbing clarity. Inside, Jessica was holding court in the living room. Marcus looked the part of the successful executive: tailored suit, expensive watch, perfect haircut. Jessica clung to his arm, laughing too loudly at his jokes, her body language screaming her desire to impress. Dad sat in his usual armchair, nodding along to the conversation with the practiced air of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of seeming engaged while thinking about other things. Jessica acknowledged my arrival with the barest minimum of enthusiasm. "You remember I mentioned Marcus." Marcus extended his hand with the confident grip of someone used to making impressions. "Jessica speaks so fondly of her little brother. The computer guy, right?" "Software integration," I corrected mildly. "Nice to meet you." Dinner began with Mom's usual fussing over place settings and serving dishes. Jessica had strategically positioned herself and Marcus at the end of the table closest to Dad, ensuring they would be the focus of attention. I sat quietly observing the dynamic as it unfolded. Marcus just closed a $70 million account, Jessica announced as Mom served the mashed potatoes. The CEO of Westridge Industries personally requested him for their portfolio management. "That's wonderful." Mom beamed, nearly glowing with vicarious pride. "Such important work you both do. The financial backbone of our economy." Dad nodded his agreement. "Impressive credentials, young man. Your parents must be proud." The conversation continued in this vein, through the appetizers, and into the main course. Jessica detailed their recent weekend in the Berkshires. Marcus mentioned his Harvard Business School network, and Mom soaked it all in like a sponge, occasionally glancing in my direction, with looks that clearly communicated her wish that I could be more like them. The tension built steadily within me, but I maintained my composure, eating quietly and responding politely when directly addressed. I noticed something else as well, a nervous energy from Jessica. Beneath her polished exterior, she was watching me carefully, perhaps wondering if I would mention our recent disagreement or reveal anything about our financial arrangement. The breaking point came with the pumpkin pie. Mom had just served dessert when Marcus began describing the investment opportunity he was offering to a select group of colleagues. "It's a unique situation," he explained with practiced charm. "Pre-IPO shares in a biotech company that's developed a breakthrough treatment. The public offering will triple the value minimum." Jessica mentioned she's investing, Dad said, showing unusual interest. "Sounds like a smart move." "Oh yes," Marcus confirmed. Jessica was quick to recognize the opportunity. "That's why she's so successful. She has excellent instincts." Jessica smiled triumphantly, casting a challenging look in my direction. The subtext was clear. She had found another way to finance the investment I had refused to fund. Mom seized the moment to draw her favorite comparison. "Jessica has always had a head for business. Even as a child, she understood value." She turned to me with that familiar expression of disappointment. "Lee's more of a dreamer. Never quite found his footing in the professional world." Jessica smirked at this assessment, secure in her position as the successful sibling. The familiar dynamic was playing out exactly as it had countless times before. But this time was different. This time I had reached my limit. "You know, Mom," I said, calmly taking a deliberate sip of my water. You've been making that same comparison for about 30 years now. Mom looked surprised at my direct response. Well, it's just that Jessica has always been so driven. The position she's achieved at her age is remarkable. It certainly appears that way, I agreed mildly. Appears Jessica's voice had a warning edge. I set down my glass carefully. Success can be measured in many ways, can't it? Income, title, possessions. Appearance. Marcus looked between us, sensing the undercurrent, but not understanding its source. Dad sat up straighter, his usual detachment giving way to wary attention. Mom, oblivious to the tension, or perhaps deliberately ignoring it, pressed on. There's no appears about it. Jessica is the youngest vice president in her company's history. She's on track for the executive committee. She sighed dramatically. You'll never be as successful as your sister Lee. That's just a fact. Jessica smirked at this pronouncement, a reflexive response, conditioned by years of being the favored child. In that moment, seeing her smug satisfaction, even as she depended on me financially, something shifted inside me. I took another sip of my water, using the moment to make a final decision about what would come next. The room seemed to hold its breath. You know, I said conversationally, that's probably true. I'll never be as successful as Jessica appears to be. I emphasized the word slightly, just enough to change its meaning. Jessica's smirk faltered. What's that supposed to mean? She asked sharply. Just that appearances can be deceiving, I replied. For instance, Jessica appears to afford her penthouse, her vacation home, her luxury car, and her designer wardrobe on her vice president's salary. I turned to Marcus. Impressive, isn't it? Most financial executives I know struggle with the tax burden at that income level. Yet Jessica manages multiple properties and significant discretionary spending. Marcus frowned slightly. Jessica's very good with money management. Extraordinarily good, I agreed. Almost supernatural, really. Unless, of course, there's another explanation. Lee, Jessica's voice was tight with warning. This isn't the time or place. I disagree, I replied calmly. If we're going to discuss success and achievement over Thanksgiving dinner, we should have all the facts, shouldn't we? Otherwise, we're just perpetuating illusions. Mom looked confused. What are you talking about? What illusions? I looked directly at Jessica, giving her one last chance to stop what was about to happen. Her face flushed with anger rather than contrition, her eyes silently daring me to continue. The illusion that Jessica's lifestyle is sustainable on her income alone, I said finally. The reality is that I've been funding her for the past 5 years. The penthouse, the Hamptons house, the car, the vacations, all of it subsidized by monthly transfers from my supposedly unsuccessful computer business. The silence that followed was absolute. Mom's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Marcus stared at Jessica with dawning comprehension. That's ridiculous. Jessica finally managed her voice unnaturally high. Lee's just jealous as usual. Bank records don't lie, I replied simply. Neither do the legal documents establishing your equity stake in Integrate X in exchange for the financial support. We can pull those up right now if anyone's interested. Integrate X, Dad spoke for the first time. The software company that was acquired last year for hundreds of millions. I nodded. That's the one. My company. Jessica owns 5%, currently valued at approximately $3 million, though she's chosen not to liquidate any portion to address her underlying financial issues. Marcus turned to Jessica, his expression hardening. Is this true? You told me you were investing your own money in the Meridian biotech opportunity. Jessica's face had gone from red to white. I can explain everything. Mom looked between us, struggling to process this reversal of the narrative she'd built over decades. But Jessica has always been the successful one. Jessica has always been very good at appearing successful, I corrected gently. And she is successful in many ways. She's achieved a remarkable position at a young age. But financial success, that's a different story. Why would you pay for her lifestyle? Dad asked, genuine confusion in his voice. After the way she's treated you all these years. It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times. Family is complicated, I said finally. Jessica needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. I never intended to expose this arrangement. I was content to let everyone continue believing what they wanted to believe. Then why now? Mom demanded, anger beginning to replace her shock. Why humiliate your sister this way? I looked at her steadily. Because of what you just said at this table. You'll never be as successful as your sister. After 30 years of comparisons and judgments based on a false narrative, I'm simply setting the record straight. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner marked the seconds of uncomfortable silence. Finally, Marcus stood up. I think I should go, he said stiffly. Jessica, we'll discuss this at another time. He left without another word, the front door closing, with decisive finality behind him. Jessica stared at her plate, tears of humiliation forming in her eyes. I hope you're satisfied, she whispered. I'm not, I replied honestly. There's no satisfaction in this moment for anyone. But maybe there's an opportunity for something more valuable than satisfaction. What's that? Dad asked quietly. Truth, I said. A chance to rebuild our relationships on something real instead of the fiction we've been living with for as long as I can remember. The dinner ended shortly after with none of the usual lingering over coffee and dessert. As I prepared to leave, Mom caught me at the door, her expression complex with emotions I couldn't fully decipher. Was any of it true? She asked. The things I believed about you and Jessica all these years? Some of it, I admitted. Jessica is brilliant and accomplished in her field. And I did struggle to find my path in the beginning. But success isn't always visible. From the outside, Mom. End quote. Sometimes it grows quietly out of sight, until one day, it can't be ignored anymore. I left her with that thought, stepping out into the cold November night, with a strange mixture of regret and relief. The family narrative had been irrevocably altered, and what would emerge from the wreckage remained to be seen. The drive home from Thanksgiving dinner felt surreal. Years of carefully maintained pretense had been shattered in a single evening, leaving nothing but raw truth in its wake. My phone began ringing before I even reached the highway. Jessica, then Mom, then Jessica again. I let the calls go to voicemail, needing time to process what had happened before engaging with the fallout. By morning, my inbox was flooded. Jessica had sent 7 emails ranging from furious accusations to tearful apologies. The final one, timestamped at 3:15 in the morning, simply read, "What happens now?" It was the first honest question she'd asked in years, and it deserved a thoughtful response. I waited until afternoon before calling her. I never meant to humiliate you, I said, when she answered, her voice hoarse from what sounded like hours of crying. What did you think would happen? She demanded. You destroyed everything in front of Marcus, in front of Mom and Dad. My relationship, my reputation, everything. I exposed the truth, I corrected gently. If your relationship and reputation can't survive, truth, were they ever real to begin with? Her silence suggested this question had struck home. Marcus broke things off, she said finally. He said he can't trust someone who would lie about something so fundamental. The executive committee nomination is probably off the table too, once word gets around. I felt a pang of regret, not for revealing the truth, but for the pain it was causing her. I'm sorry it came to this. I truly am. But Jessica, you've been living beyond your means for years, building a house of cards that was bound to collapse eventually. Maybe this is an opportunity to rebuild something more sustainable. Easy for you to say, she snapped. You're actually rich. I just played the part. And you can be successful without pretending I insisted. You're brilliant at what you do. Your accomplishments at the firm are real. The rest, the material trappings you thought you needed, that's what got you into trouble. The conversation continued in circles, Jessica alternating between anger, self-pity, and occasional moments of clarity. We agreed to suspend our financial arrangement immediately, though I assured her I wouldn't demand repayment of past support. Her equity stake in Integrate X remained hers, a resource she could use responsibly if she chose to. Mom's call came the next day, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. Your father and I have been talking, she began without preamble. We've realized we may have misunderstood some things over the years. Coming from Mom, this qualified as a profound admission. It's easy to miss what you're not looking for, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. All those years we thought. She trailed off. Lee, why didn't you tell us about your business success? It was a question that required brutal honesty. Would you have believed me? Or would you have found a way to diminish it compared to Jessica's achievements? Her silence was answer enough. And truthfully, I continued, at some point, I stopped needing your approval. I found validation in building something meaningful in solving problems and creating value. External validation, especially from people who had predetermined my worth, all-d, became less important. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. Maybe we don't fix the past, I suggested. Maybe we just try to build something different going forward. The ripple effects extended beyond our immediate family. Extended relatives who had witnessed years of comparisons at family gatherings began reaching out. Aunt Susan called to say she'd always thought I had potential. Uncle Robert emailed to ask about investment opportunities in tech startups. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly found reasons to reconnect. The most unexpected contact came from Marcus, who requested a meeting at his office in Boston the following week. I agreed, curious about his perspective on everything that had transpired. His corner office showcased the trappings of conventional success: awards, credentials, the obligatory golf memorabilia. He offered me a seat with the practiced courtesy of someone accustomed to power dynamics. I want to understand what actually happened with you and Jessica, he said, getting straight to the point. The financial arrangement, the secrecy, all of it. I gave him a straightforward account, neither vilifying Jessica nor absolving her of responsibility. She created an image she couldn't sustain, I concluded. I enabled it longer than I should have. He nodded thoughtfully. The Meridian biotech investment she was pushing. Did you look into it? Enough to have concerns, I replied. Limited disclosure pressure, tactics, exclusive access, classic red flags. You were right to be concerned, he confirmed. The SEC is investigating. Several committee members are already lawyering up. This revelation sent a chill through me. Jessica had nearly entangled herself in something potentially illegal. My refusal to fund that particular investment might have saved her from serious legal consequences, even as it triggered the confrontation that exposed everything else. Does Jessica know about the investigation, I asked? Not from me, Marcus replied. But word is spreading within the firm. Her association with me won't help her case, even if she never actually invested. I felt a mixture of concern for my sister and gratitude that the situation hadn't become even worse. For what it's worth, I believe Jessica was naive, rather than deliberately deceptive about the investment. She was desperate to maintain her position and image. Marcus studied me with professional assessment. You know, the irony in all this is that you've demonstrated better financial judgment and business acumen than most of the so-called experts I work with daily. IntegrateX is considered one of the most promising acquisitions in the tech sector this year. The comment highlighted how thoroughly the narrative had shifted. The family disappointment was now being acknowledged as a business success by someone from Jessica's world of traditional achievement. Word of what happened at Thanksgiving spread through both family and professional circles, as such things inevitably do. Jessica faced significant fallout at work. While she kept her vice president title, she was quietly removed from consideration for the executive committee. Colleagues who had once sought her approval now maintained professional distance, wary of association with someone whose reputation had been compromised. The most surprising development came from my father. A week after Thanksgiving, he asked if he could visit my office. It was the first time he had expressed any interest in seeing where I worked or what I actually did. I gave him a tour of our headquarters, introduced him to my team, and explained in layman's terms what our technology actually accomplished. He listened with uncharacteristic attention, asking questions that revealed a genuine attempt to understand. I never realized, he said, as we sat in my office afterward. All these years, when you talked about your business, I pictured something smaller, less significant. It started that way, I acknowledged. But it grew. That's how these things work. You build foundation first, then add layers. He nodded slowly. Your mother and I, we measured success by metrics we understood. Degrees, titles, traditional career paths. What you were doing seemed foreign, risky. He looked around at the office that clearly signified achievement even by conventional standards. We were wrong. It was perhaps the most meaningful acknowledgement I had ever received from him, not just of my success, but of the limitations in how he had judged me. The admission couldn't erase decades of missed connection, but it opened a door that had long been closed between us. As the weeks passed, new patterns began to emerge from the wreckage of our family's old narrative. Jessica moved out of her penthouse into a still nice, but more affordable condo. She began therapy to address the deep-seated need for validation that had driven her financial decisions. We spoke occasionally, our conversations strained, but gradually becoming more authentic. Mom struggled the most with the new reality. Having built her identity around being the mother of an exceptionally successful daughter, she found it difficult to recalibrate her perspective. Her phone calls became less frequent, but more thoughtful with fewer comparisons and judgments. As for me, the burden of secrecy had been lifted. I no longer needed to downplay my achievements or maintain the fiction of modest circumstances. While I had never craved the spotlight, there was a quiet satisfaction in being seen accurately by those who had misperceived me for so long. The truth once revealed had changed everything. Not always comfortably, not always kindly, but perhaps necessarily. The foundations were being laid for relationships built on reality rather than illusion, on acceptance rather than constant comparison. Whether those foundations would support something lasting remained to be seen. 1 year after the Thanksgiving that changed everything, I stood outside my mother's house with a bottle of wine and a sense of cautious optimism. The past 12 months had been a period of profound adjustment for our family, filled with difficult conversations, tentative reconciliations, and slow but meaningful progress toward a new normal. Jessica arrived moments after I did, stepping out of a sensible SUV that had replaced her luxury sedan. The change in vehicle reflected broader changes in her life. After the fallout from our Thanksgiving revelation, she had made difficult but necessary adjustments. She'd liquidated a portion of her Integrate X equity to clear her debts and establish financial stability. She downsized her living arrangements and lifestyle to align with her actual income. Most significantly, she'd begun the challenging work of separating her self-worth from external markers of success. "You look well," I said, and meant it. Despite the material downgrades, she appeared healthier than I'd seen her in years. The constant tension that had lined her face had softened. "Therapy twice a week will do that for you," she replied with a self-deprecating smile that would have been unimaginable a year ago. "Turns out, addressing your childhood trauma is good for your complexion." We shared a laugh that felt like a small miracle given where we'd been 12 months earlier. As we walked to the door together, she touched my arm lightly. "I never properly thanked you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For stopping me from investing in Meridian Biotech." Her expression turned serious. "3 executives at my firm are under indictment. If I had been involved." I nodded, understanding the gravity of what she'd narrowly avoided. Sometimes the best help we can offer is saying no when it matters. Inside, Mom had prepared Thanksgiving dinner with her usual attention to detail, but the atmosphere felt distinctly different. Dad greeted me with a firm handshake that turned into an unexpected hug. Mom's welcome was still tinged with awkwardness, but the brittle quality that had characterized our interactions for decades was noticeably absent. "I invited someone I mentioned as we moved into the living room. I hope that's okay." Mom looked surprised but nodded. "Of course. Is it? Are you seeing someone?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. My guest had arrived, not a romantic partner, as Mom had assumed, but Brian, my business partner, since the early days of Integrate X. I had never brought anyone from my professional life to family gatherings before maintaining strict separation between those worlds. This integration represented another step in dismantling the compartmentalized existence I had maintained for so long. Dinner proceeded with a surreal quality. Conversations flowed without the undercurrent of competition and comparison that had previously defined our family interactions. Brian shared stories about the early days of our company, filling in gaps in my family's understanding of my professional journey. Jessica spoke candidly about her new role at a smaller firm where she'd found a more supportive culture. Dad remarkably talked more than I could remember him doing at any previous family gathering. Mom remained the most reserved, still adjusting to the new family dynamic. But even she contributed meaningful conversation, asking questions about my work that showed genuine interest rather than comparative assessment. "I've been thinking a lot about success lately," she said during dessert, surprising us all with the directness of her reflection. "About how I measured it, how I taught you both to measure it." She looked between Jessica and me with an expression I couldn't quite identify. I may have gotten some things wrong. From Mom, this qualified as a profound admission. Jessica and I exchanged glances, equally stunned by this uncharacteristic vulnerability. We all did what we thought was right at the time Dad offered, reaching for Mom's hand in a rare display of public affection. Now we know better, so we do better. After dinner, while Jessica helped Mom with the dishes, Dad invited me to join him on the back porch. We stood in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching our breath form clouds in the cold November air. "Your company," he said finally. "It's doing something meaningful, isn't it? Not just making money." "We're trying to," I confirmed. "The integration solutions we develop help businesses communicate more effectively, reduce waste, increase efficiency. It's not saving lives like a doctor, but it creates real value." He nodded thoughtfully. "I spent 40 years at the same insurance company following rules created by someone else." "You built something from nothing." His voice carried a note of wonder, as if he was still processing this reality. "That takes courage I never had." The acknowledgement from my father, not just of my success, but of the character it required, meant more than any external validation ever could. "I learned more from you than you might think," I told him. "Your consistency, your reliability. Those qualities matter in business, too." Inside, Jessica was having her own moment of reconciliation with Mom. I overheard fragments of their conversation. Jessica's admission of the pressure she'd felt to maintain perfection, Mom's acknowledgement of the role she'd played in creating those expectations. It wasn't a complete resolution of decades of complex dynamics, but it was a beginning. In the months that followed that second Thanksgiving, our family continued the gradual work of rebuilding relationships on more authentic foundations. Jessica and I established a new kind of sibling relationship, not the forced closeness of childhood, nor the competitive distance of our early adulthood, but something based on mutual respect and understanding. She found unexpected fulfillment in her new position, where her talents were valued without the toxic pressure of her previous environment. "I'm not the youngest, or the most impressive anything anymore," she told me during one of our now regular coffee meetings. And it's actually a relief. Mom made efforts in her own way, sending articles about tech innovations with notes, saying she thought of me when she read them. Small gestures, but meaningful in the context of our history. Dad and I began a tradition of monthly lunches where we gradually bridged the gap that had existed between us for as long as I could remember. My own journey continued as well. The revelation of my success freed me from the constraints of maintaining a false narrative, allowing me to live more authentically in all areas of my life. I became more engaged in philanthropic efforts, using my resources to support educational initiatives that helped young people pursue unconventional paths to success. The most profound lesson from this experience wasn't about money or achievement or even family dynamics. It was about the liberating power of living truthfully. For years, I had accepted a role in a story that didn't reflect reality: the underachieving brother, the family disappointment. Jessica had done the same from the opposite position, trapped in a narrative of perfect success that required increasing levels of deception to maintain. True freedom came not from financial success or professional recognition, but from breaking free of these predefined roles and writing our own authentic stories. It came from recognizing that external validation, whether from parents, colleagues, or society, would always be an insufficient foundation for self-worth. One evening, as spring began to replace winter, Mom called with news that crystallized how far we had come. "I'm thinking of starting a small business," she announced without preamble, "a boutique featuring local artisans. I've always had an eye for unique pieces." The irony wasn't lost on me. Mom, who had valued traditional paths and prestigious credentials above all else, was considering entrepreneurship at 65. "That sounds wonderful," I said, meaning it. "I'd be happy to help with the business plan if you'd like." I was hoping you might say that, she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Jessica's already offered to help with the accounting. She says it's good practice for her new certification course." That night, reflecting on the journey of the past year, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude for the Thanksgiving confrontation that had seemed so devastating at the time. The exposure of long-hidden truths had been painful but necessary, clearing away the accumulated debris of pretense and allowing something more genuine to grow in its place. Family healing is rarely a straight line, and ours certainly wasn't. There were still difficult moments, old patterns that occasionally reasserted themselves, wounds that needed more time to fully heal. But the direction was clear, toward greater authenticity, respect, and acceptance of each other, as we actually were, not as we wished each other to be. The measure of success I had come to believe wasn't found in bank accounts or job titles or the approval of others. It lay in the courage to live truthfully, to build meaningful connections, and to define achievement on your own terms. By that measure, our family was finally finding its way toward real success, together. Have you ever had to stand up to family expectations that didn't align with your own definition of success? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. I'd love to hear how you navigated those challenging conversations. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your own path. Remember, true success isn't measured by others' yardsticks, but by the authentic life you build for yourself. Thanks for listening, and I wish you the courage to live your truth, whatever that may be.